Welcome back to another Monster Mondays, a series where I will be drawing a creature from D&D, and I'll also be talking about its lore, its history, and what it's like to fight. This week I'll be covering Mindflayers, another super iconic creature in D&D. Before we get started though, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a little like and share it with someone who you think might find this interesting. We're a very new channel, so anything you can do like that really helps us out. But anyway, let's get started with Mindflayers. So first little interesting Mindflayer fact is that they're not actually called Mindflayers. They're denoted in the book, and that's kind of the colloquialism in D&D land. Whatever universe you're in, they're usually called Mindflayers. But their actual species name, the name that they prefer, are ilithids. And they're pretty fascinating, not just because they are interesting to fight, but because they're one of the few creatures in D&D that was absolutely not pulled from a myth or a legend. Just like the Beholder, they're totally iconic and original to D&D. When you see one of these guys, you pretty much immediately recognize that they're a D&D creature. They've not been anywhere else really. They were created by Gary Gygax for 1st edition D&D, and we can kind of see where they've been inspired. They're humanoid creatures which have these kind of tentacles for mouths, if that makes sense. 4 tentacles at the front of the face. When you see them, immediately you gotta think H.P. Lovecraft. Come on, that looks just like Cthulhu. And I mean, they're about 5 or 6 feet tall, something like that. They're sort of standard human height, as it were. But otherwise, yeah, they totally look like Cthulhu. This kind of tentacle-mouthed beast. This god. And we kind of had that confirmed because Gary Gygax apparently drew inspiration from Titus Crow, or the novel cover of one of the Titus Crow novels. Titus Crow being the protagonist in a set of horror novels that are entrenched based on Lovecraft mythos, written by Brian Lumley. So definitely they're very tied to this kind of octopus-like H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu mythos stuff. I think more specifically than just like the cover for a book, I think they are referred to in some of Lovecraft's or the extended Lovecraft universe literature, because we have these creatures in there that are worshippers of Cthulhu, who are known as the star spawn of Cthulhu. We're told that they look like him, which the ilithids do, which the Mindflayers do, and they built the city of R'lyeh, or R'lyeh, however you want to pronounce it, R''Lyeh, famously the city in the Call of Cthulhu, where the great Cthulhu rests. A sort of cyclopean, strange, masonry, alien city that rests under the sea, imprisoning or holding Cthulhu while he sleeps. And the star spawn, the spawn of Cthulhu, are supposed to have built that city. Basically, they were made by Cthulhu, or at the same time as Cthulhu. They resemble him, and they would travel from planet to planet with Cthulhu until eventually they reached Earth in the mythos, and that's where they built the city. Cthulhu and his spawn are supposed to be telepathic and communicate telepathically, and that's how, through their bizarre intelligence, they managed to create the city of R'lyeh. Now, Mindflayers actually mimic this in their history. We're told an awful lot about them in the Monster Manual and in Volo's Guide. I would definitely recommend Volo's Guide if you don't own it. There's a lot of really interesting lore about the creatures of D&D inside. But we're told that eons ago, from whatever time we set our setting in, ilithids had a star-spanning empire, just like the star spawn of Cthulhu. They travelled from planet to planet, as the Lovecraft mythos tells us, in flying ships called nautiloids, which look like giant conches. They were slavers and tyrants over hundreds of different worlds, and they also travelled into different dimensions in different times. They subjugated loads of different species, including the Gith and the Kuo-Toa, these kind of fish people, until eventually the Gith had had enough. They fought back, they destroyed the entire Illithid empire, leaving nothing but little shattered fragments who scattered towards the far corners of the universe, hid. Many of them found their way to whatever planet you're playing on, to whatever world or universe you're playing on, entrenched themselves in the Underdark, this kind of underground world where a lot of drow live, and started to set up their own little covens, their own colonies of illithids together. Now, interestingly, in Volo's Guide, we learned that people are slightly skeptical of this. Illithids are massively powerful, and the Gith are, just kind of like people. They're kind of green, sort of bat-like nosed people. I'll do another video on them at some point, describe them a bit more. But until then, they were a slave race, basically. They were a slave race of the Mindflayers, and somehow they managed to get enough power to completely destroy a galaxy-spanning empire. A lot of scholars in Volo's Guide basically think this is super unlikely. This is very, very unlikely to have happened, for them to have overnight basically amassed its power to threaten the Mindflayers. And the number one theory is that what actually happened might have been that the Mindflayers actually just moved their empire to another plane of existence, to another reality, or perhaps forward in time, maybe just in time to play a Starjammer setting where the Gith would no longer harm them. My personal theory, though, is if the Gith did not manage to accomplish the feats that they think they didn't manage to destroy the Mindflayer Empire, it's possible that with the Mindflayers' immense psychic power, they managed to convince the Gith had in fact won. Wherever they go, they don't see the Empire, but that's just because the Mindflayers only want them to see certain things. And ilithids are famous for being hugely psychically powerful, very, very telepathic creatures. Hence the name Mindflayer, I guess. They're going to flay your mind. They're so reliant on psychic abilities that telepathy is actually their primary method of communication. They usually communicate to one another and other creatures through psychic means. They command vast legions of mind-controlled thralls and other stuff like that, so it helps them to be able to broadcast their thoughts over a wide area. They do have a written language on the rare occasions that they have to document anything, and they communicate in Quailith, which is like a kind of braille, a very sensitive braille, that they use their tentacles on the front of their faces that are very, very sensitive. They can sense a lot of very subtle changes in texture to make these little bumps here and there that only these little tentacles can read with sensitivity. They can speak as well. By definition, they kind of, a standard illithid knows deep speech and undercommon, two very, very rare languages. They can learn other languages though, but they don't have tongues to speak. So what they tend to do is if they have to speak verbally, they will put one of these tentacles on their face down their own throat, pass it back up, and use that as a flexible tongue, which is ultra disgusting. Can only imagine how gross that would sound, but just adds to the creepiness of the Mindflayer. Gameplay wise, their immense psychic powers manifest in a few different ways. Obviously, telepathy is their primary method of speech, but that only allows them to speak to one creature at a time. So, just like hearing, they can use detect thoughts at will, so they can hear all thoughts around them. They can also cast levitate on themselves or objects or anything nearby at will. This is just something that they have access to, so they're very rarely going to be using their physical strength, and we kind of see that in their build. They're not hugely muscly creatures, not very athletic. They all look like kind of spellcast, really. That's probably because they can cast levitate at will. They have a decent amount of telekinesis. Once per day as well, the standard illithid can cast dominate monster to dominate the mind of someone. They're very into their having thralls and enslaving people. Or they can cast plane shift, very in keeping with the H.P. Lovecraft kind of interdimensionality of creatures. Their main method of attack has stayed the same since the very first edition, since the 1970s, and that is an ability called Mind Blast. It's described as follows. The Mindflayer magically emits psychic energy in a 60-foot cone. Each creature in that area must succeed on an intelligence saving throw, or they'll take 4d8 plus 4 psychic damage and be stunned for 1 minute. The creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect it's successful. So, very, very psychically potent creatures. But interestingly, that doesn't seem to me like magic. Now, it's called innate spellcasting. So, fair dues, spellcasting is defined as spellcasting, but these are natural abilities. These aren't spellcasters. They don't like spellcasting. Mindflayers even hate and revile spellcasting as an abomination, which I'll get into in just a second. And on top of that, they have a magical resistance. You know, they're resistant to a lot of different kinds of magic as a result of this kind of oily slime that kind of covers their bodies. And it got me thinking that maybe if they have this stuff that makes them resistant to magic surrounding their entire bodies, and they can still cast these immensely powerful abilities, they're very anti-magic. It makes me think that, you know, this isn't a magical ability. They've evolved, or however they came about, they have this power innately, right? So I think an argument could be made that even if they're standing in an anti-magic zone, an anti-magic field, you know, you cast a spell magic on something like that, an argument could definitely be made for that not affecting their abilities. That's certainly how I would play it, that this is an innate effect that maybe players would think is magical, and in the world of D&D you would maybe describe as magical, but I don't think it actually is magic. Now they're a challenge rating 7 creature, so, you know, they're pretty tough, but there's a variant of them in Volo's guide that increases their challenge rating by 1, and they also learn a lot of other psychic abilities on top of that. They become proper psionic spellcasters, if that makes sense. Gives them a bit more of an arsenal to throw at players. But circling back to the whole idea of magic, you know, what's wrong with magic? Why don't they like it? Why might they have built up this resistance to it with this kind of slime around their bodies? Well, as I kind of touched on before, they view magic as kind of wild and unpredictable, maybe a little bit primitive, because all these creatures that they encounter on our world, on the D&D world, this medieval world, that's not a star-spanning sci-fi empire can cast magic. So they kind of view it as really, really primitive and kind of disgusting. In fact, although easily capable of doing it, I mean, there are rules in the standard monster manual for ilithids that cast magic. They're very easily able to cast spells. They're considered deviants and rogues, kind of outlaws of traditional illithid society if an illithid decides to take up the practice of spellcasting. They see it as kind of like a really messy cousin of their psychic abilities. Some believe that their hatred of magic is probably because the Gith might have used magic to defeat them and their empire. In fact, we know that the Illithid are desperate to abolish the practice of all magic once they rebuild their shattered empire and take over the universe again. But what do these fragments of empires look like? Well, until they rebuild it, they live in small colonies. They build little tiny empires, hiding from most of the population. They live underground in the Underdark. They live in these little cities of about 5 miles, no larger than, because in the very center of it lives an elder brain. Basically a huge central brain, for lack of a better term. It looks exactly like a brain in a pool of kind of cerebral juices, and these elder brains form a neural network between all the Mindflayers within 5 miles, telling them exactly what to do, what to feel, kind of passing its knowledge on. Seems less like kind of mind domination than it does kind of having a walkie-talkie with them at all times that keeps them all communicating, but also sends them suggestions of what they should be doing. That said, those suggestions are not to be taken lightly. The Elder Brain expects perfect obedience from illithids under its roof, basically in this city, as long as it's within 5 miles. And in exchange, this Elder Brain offers an eternal afterlife for those that are obedient. Basically, when an illithid is about to die, they take the brain and they absorb it into the Elder Brain. And an illithid's main priority in life is to gather enough information so that when they join this hive mind in the center, when they join this Elder Brain, they'll be able to contribute to it and also learn unlimited knowledge, because the Elder Brain is an ancient thing that basically houses all the collective knowledge, a perfect memory of all illithid history. So this is why they very rarely need to write anything down. You know, they don't need to detail anything because something in the center of their city remembers absolutely everything any of them have ever done. However, there is a slight flaw here. All illithids believe, or most illithids believe, that when they die, you know, all their collective knowledge will be absorbed into the Elder Brain. They'll live eternally as a collective of thoughts inside this brain. However, with this psychic link between all the illithids within the range of an Elder Brain, the Elder Brain kind of already knows everything that they know anyway. So why would it need to absorb them? Well, we learn a little bit about that. It's kind of believed that due to the tyrannical nature of illithids, their leaders, these Elder Brains, are actually manipulating them. It's believed that upon death, this absorption process that's supposed to make them immortal actually drowns out the thoughts of the individual illithid that's being absorbed into the brain, strips it of all knowledge, and destroys the brain, basically just eating its psychic energy to extend the life and the personal power of the Elder Brain instead, while keeping all the rest of the illithids subservient, believing this religion of like an eternal afterlife. So it seems like they might be getting mind controlled after all, or at least promised a lot of stuff that won't really happen to them. It's a form of mind control, I suppose. Now, we do have rogue illithids that kind of wander away from the Elder Brain. They're usually the outcasts, the ones that are discovered to be casting magic. They're usually kicked out of illithid cities, and once out of the range of the Elder Brain, they start to develop some independent thoughts. They start to maybe turn away from quite the life of evil that they lived before. They start practicing a lot more magic, and they kind of maybe respect creatures of power a little bit more. They don't tend to have quite so many thralls and servants and mind-controlled dupes. They tend to recognize power in other creatures and can even be seen as loyal advisors and servants to other powerful civilizations, cities, all that kind of stuff. They get a kind of new clarity of mind, as if they were being mind controlled themselves by the Elder Brain. And it's believed that this might be why the Elder Brain actually wants all the other illithids to hate magic, because as illithids develop magical powers, they can use divination magic, they can learn telepathic blocking spells that eventually might make them see the motives of the Elder Brain for what it really wants. It might start to break away the mind control of the Elder Brain, and this rogue illithid might start telling the other illithids what's going on, that they're being controlled, that there is no afterlife, all this kind of stuff, and there'll be a revolt. The Elder Brains will get killed. So they shun them, make sure the rest of society do too, and kick them out if the illithid casting magic doesn't want to leave by its own accord. Now, often we find that these illithids kind of turn to necromancy if they don't join a giant society, and that's because they still want this eternal life. They usually become liches, for which there are rules in Volo's Guide, undead ilithids that live forever, independent of the eternal life that they believe they've wanted through the Elder Brain. And interestingly, they're described as being kind of flaky and crusty with sunken eyes, all because they don't have this constant protective layer of moisture surrounding them, this kind of slime that covers the normal ilithid, the standard ilithid. And it's kind of believed that this slime, this ooze that surrounds other ilithids, actually comes from the pool of cerebral juices that surrounds the Elder Brain. And we know that this ooze is the reason why they have magical resistance. So is it possible that this ooze is a mind-controlling protectional barrier created by the Elder Brain to smother its thralls, these very powerful Mindflayers, in a resistant magical ooze that basically will stop them from learning magic so that they don't become individual, they don't turn on their master? I think so. I definitely think so. And once they leave, once they become rogue, they lose this slime, they start to think for themselves, they start to decay a little bit, but they learn magics to kind of heal themselves, to learn necromancies to keep themselves alive eternally anyway. The other type of illithid that kind of goes rogue, but it's seen as a bit more okay, are ilithids, which are basically very, very powerful ilithids. And basically what they do is they're just born one day, they're kind of sorcerers, they're kind of like the sorcerers, the psychic sorcerers of the illithid world, more powerful than the standard, and they think entirely for themselves. They're in no way connected to the Elder Brain, but they can actually cause other illithids to follow them, just like an Elder Brain, but an Elder Brain that can walk around and talk by itself. It doesn't have the collective memories of an entire civilization, but it's basically a walking, talking Elder Brain. And the Elder Brain would usually quash any kind of resistance to its own ideas, any kind of competition. But at a certain age, illithids kind of get this compulsion to leave a colony and start a colony of their own, basically taking all those that will listen to it with it. And the Elder Brain kind of is okay with this because A, they're going to leave eventually, returning the power balance back to where it was, with the Elder Brain at the top of this particular colony, while the illithid goes and makes his own colony. Takes away some of the illithids that are more likely to be susceptible to suggestion, because only those that do not follow this illithid are now 100% loyal to the Elder Brain. So only the strong survive. He has a strong contingent of followers, basically, once this illithid takes away the wheat, sorts the wheat from the chaff. Now, what kind of magic do illithids learn if they want to become spellcasters? Well, usually the Arcane, right? It's something that you can learn. But what about divine magic? I mean, they're going after necromancy, and that's the cousin of divine magic. A lot of clerics, a lot of paladins, a lot of priests, when they raise someone from the dead, are actually using divine magic as necromancy. They're using their own necromantic magic. Absolutely. Yeah, they can absolutely use divine magic. It's rare, but it does happen. And I feel like this would definitely get you exiled from an illithid colony if you start believing in any kind of god, start practicing and worshipping any kind of god. Illithids recognize that divine creatures exist, but they are interdimensional travelers themselves. They go to these other planes, they go to these other worlds. They've seen gods, they've seen angels, they've seen devils, they've seen all this kind of stuff. So they don't believe that they're mythical. You know, they have planar travel, so none of this is mysterious to them. They don't believe that they have souls, so they don't believe that they go anywhere when they die other than into an Elder Brain if they're lucky. They don't believe the gods are anything other than just powerful creatures, but they can cast this magic if they need to. And they don't have gods, but they do kind of sometimes revere two sets of ideals, two philosophies that are represented by two different sort of ancient creatures who typify these ideologies. So they kind of have the first one called Manzakorian, which is a belief in comprehension, pure comprehension and retention of thought, memorizing stuff, amassing as much knowledge as they possibly can. And the other one is called Ilsensine, which is a belief in universal knowledge, which sounds all well and good, sounds quite monk-like actually, you know, we're all one. But what it really means is domination in all creatures, to dominate all life, eventually leading to one super intelligence at the very end, after devouring all the gods and everything like that exists in every plane. So they're not great creatures. Their very nature is pretty vile. So illithids are basically designed, crafted to dominate all life. Their only aims are to mentally dominate and control any creatures they can find and restore their empire to a galaxy-spanning slaver universe whereby they rule everything. But in the meantime, their main aim is to survive, just to survive, because they only have tiny fragments of this old empire that they remember, and they want to hold on to life, the life of their species. species. They'll do anything to do that. Now, to survive, an ilithid needs to eat, and what does it eat? It eats brains, okay? So they're very vampiric, they're very parasitic creatures. In-game, they have an ability called Extract Brain, which is when they encounter an incapacitated creature. The target takes 10d10 piercing damage as their skull is ripped apart. If this damage reduces the target to 0, the Mind Flayer kills the target instantly by extracting and devouring its brain. And they're particularly efficient at doing this because, as I mentioned, this Mind Blast beforehand incapacitates all the creatures that it hits if they fail their intelligence saving throw. But also they have a tentacle attack which grapples someone and then stuns them, incapacitating them. So you're very likely to have your brain eaten by an ilithid if you get into close quarters with it. And they have this mouth, you might see at the top of the drawing, this kind of circle of razor sharp teeth that's there to devour brains, but that's not exactly how they actually go about it. The 4 tentacles on their mouth latch themselves around a creature's head and inject a solution that basically dissolves the skull and the flesh surrounding it, seeping into the brain cavity and turning the brain into a kind of soup, which they then feed into this mouth, using those razor-sharp teeth to kind of filter through anything that it doesn't want. The mouth absorbs all the kind of material components, and the tentacles actually absorb the sort of enzymes and psychic energy of this brain through the membrane of this kind of slime that surrounds them and coats them. And it's the psychic energy, the psychic fear of the final moments of this creature and the electrical impulses of a dying brain that are the actual thing that sustains a Mind Flayer. And they can live on 1 brain per month as an absolute minimum, but they do believe that they're an absolute delicacy. There are certain creatures, such as the Kuo-toa, these kind of fish people, that famously were enslaved by the Mind Flayers for many, many years. So much so that they have apparently gone mad in the process of so much psychic control to just damage their brains. So the Mind Flayers no longer want to keep them as pets, no longer want to psychically control them because they're too kind of unwieldy, too difficult to predict, but their brains are considered a delicacy, a rarity as a result. So they enjoy the taste of a brain as well as its memories, and it sustains them and grows their powers. A Mind Flayer actually gains the memories of everyone that it's ever eaten, so this is how they primarily amass knowledge. But this kind of causes problems for their evolution because they are parasites. They require brains to live. That's the only thing they eat. So they were either created as things that are parasites, which kind of lends itself to the Cthulhu Starspawn thing. They're created by Cthulhu to be a blight on the universe, or they evolved but would have to have been cannibalistic at one point or something like that, because I doubt they're going around absorbing, the kind of rats and chicken brains and all this kind of stuff of whatever world they were first evolved on. They wouldn't have amassed very much knowledge, and so they probably wouldn't have become the society that we know them to be today. So that's a bit of a mystery. I don't know how they kind of survived up until the galactic point, but it certainly shows their motivations for wanting to dominate other creatures to have a fresh food supply. And it kind of goes to show that the elder brain that absorbs the brains of dying Mind Flayers is just a Mind Flayer. It's doing what the Mind Flayers do to other creatures, but to Mind Flayers. It's just better at convincing them to volunteer for it. But how do they propagate this species, Well, they have a weird form of reproduction called seromorphosis, which basically entails the following. For a start, we've got to understand that all Mind Flayers, all ilithids, are one gender. They don't have male and female, they just have that one kind of form that they look like. And basically what happens is, at some point, who knows how, they produce a lot of eggs, thousands and thousands of eggs, and they deposit them in the pool of fluid surrounding an elder brain. Now, in this fluid, they're subjected to psychic tortures. Some of them are devoured by the elder brain. They grow and fight with each other until they become tadpoles, leaving only very few, usually only 1 or 2 of a litter of eggs actually survive the process to become these tiny little tadpole things swimming around in the slime surrounding an elder brain. A Mind Flayer will then dominate a creature's mind, making it subservient. It has to be a humanoid creature, and they'll get one of these tadpoles and they'll insert it into the ear or nose or eye or mouth of this humanoid creature. This little tadpole will then wriggle into their brainstem, and over a series of months will devour this creature's brain, gradually turning it into a Mind Flayer. That could be quite an interesting character to play in D&D, actually, a scion with a short lifespan. Maybe it has one of these tadpoles in its brain, it's trying to fight it, gets these massive headaches, it knows it's going to die in a couple of months, but in the meantime it becomes immensely psychically powerful as it slowly transforms into a Mind Flayer. Once it is transformed, this tadpole takes over the mind of the creature, transforms it into a Mind Flayer, grows all the tentacles and all this kind of stuff, and this creature starts its new life as another ilithid. So that was the life, lore and history of ilithids, the Mind Flayers. Hope you've enjoyed this one, guys. Love getting to draw very, very distinctive iconic D&D monsters. So I hope you'll join me next Monday for more. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a little like, a little thumbs up in the corner, favorite it, and share it with someone who you think might enjoy it. Subscribe for more content like this every week. And if there's a monster that you really want to see me draw, really want to see me talk about the lore of, make sure to leave a little comment down in the comment box below, or on any of our social media. There are links in the description box. Until next time, I'll see you later.